Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, friends, guests, viewers. Thank you so much for joining us. You are now watching Muslim Network TV's special election night coverage. As you all know, it's the 2020 midterm elections. The day is finally here, Tuesday, November 8th. We are waiting to find out who is going to control the House, the Senate, governor's offices, and many other offices across the country. This is very monumental to our country and even to people around the world. So we look forward to taking in the results with you tonight and also learning about what these results mean for our country, including the American Muslim community. To start us off, I'm very happy to toss things to our host, Hina Zuberi of Muslim Network TV. Hina, take it away.
Thank you so much, Edward. We're here in our Washington studios. First, U.S. polls close as Republicans look to control Congress. The fate of both chambers of Congress is hanging in the balance as America waits for results. All 435 seats in the House of Representatives, as well as 35 seats in the Senate, are being contested. Most analysts are predicting Republicans will gain control of the House, but the fate of the Senate remains a topic of intense speculation. Several key races remain neck to neck in successive opinion polls with just a few hours before polls close. Oh, actually, polls have closed at 8 p.m. America may go to bed without knowing which party controls the U.S. House and Senate following these midterms. It could take days of waiting before it's clear who will win today's US midterm elections and whether Democrats or Republicans will control Congress, experts say. Republicans would need to pick up 5 seats to take a majority in the House and just 1 to control the Senate. A massive wave of Republican support could lead to declarations of victories hours after the polls close tonight. But with dozens of races expected to be close and key states like Pennsylvania already warning, it could take days to count every ballot. Experts say there's a good chance America will go to bed on election night without knowing who won. Fetterman campaign joins lawsuit against GOP's attack on Americans' democratic rights. John Fetterman's U.S. Senate campaign joined Democratic groups on Monday in suing to override a recent Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision. That ruling could disqualify thousands of ballots in the state, potentially swinging election results in the razor-close midterm races. The lawsuit argues that a Pennsylvania state law requiring voters to date the outer envelopes of absentee ballots has no relevance to determining whether an individual is qualified to vote. It added that this is in violation of the Civil Rights Act. The suit also stressed that the move serves no purpose other than to erect barriers to qualified voters exercising their fundamental constitutional right. It called on the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania Erie Division to prohibit state counties from refusing to count ballots over a missing envelope date. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court's ruling last week came in response to a Republican lawsuit that aimed to disqualify undated or incorrectly dated ballots. It's part of a nationwide wave of legal challenges that GOP groups are pursuing on the pretense of combating voter fraud. Trump signals intent to run in 2024. Get ready. Former President Donald Trump has signaled his intent to run for U.S. Congress, for U.S.'s top office once again after being defeated in 2020. Addressing supporters at a rally in Iowa on Thursday, Trump said, "In order to make our country successful and safe and glorious, I will very, very, very probably do it again." We're going to have to take back America, and in 2024, most importantly, we're going to take back our magnificent White House, he said in Sioux City. Trump continued to make his unfounded claims of widespread electoral fraud when he addressed his supporters in Iowa, which holds the first primary during presidential election cycles. Multiple US news outlets reported on Thursday that Trump is planning to formally announce his presidential bid after today's midterm elections. President Joe Biden has said he intends to seek re-election, though he would sit by I'm going to hand it over back to Edward.
So much, Hannah. So, this is a fascinating night. I think we're going to be looking at all sorts of issues. Number one, voting rights. Were people able to get out to vote tonight safely and securely, or was their ability to vote disrupted or interfered with? I know there were some current concerns in Arizona about armed poll watchers at polling stations. So are we seeing that anywhere across the country, or was it smooth? That's the first thing. The second thing I think we're going to be looking at tonight, Hannah, is particular states, right? They can really let us know how this is going. For example, Pennsylvania, as you noted, is a critical state for Republicans and Democrats. Whoever wins that state, there's a good chance they're going to be in control of the Senate. But we really won't know the results in Pennsylvania potentially until tomorrow or later because of how long it takes to tabulate votes in Philadelphia. And so what we could be looking at instead are other states like New Hampshire, Nevada, Arizona. If Democrats hold those states, then they're probably in a pretty good position. If they lose any of those states, then they are very likely to lose their majority in the Senate. Another key thing to look at, Hannah, as we go through the night are governor's races, right? It's not just the Senate, it's not just the House, it's also governor's races. And so that's a big thing that we're going to be looking at. So to discuss these issues with us, I think, Hannah, if you're ready, we can bring on our guests to start discussing some of these issues, including voting rights. You run the show, Hannah. Let me know if you're ready. And Hannah, go ahead. You were muted, Hannah. Go ahead.
Let's bring our guests in, and we're going to do the rest of the news after this section. So for our guests tonight, we're going to be talking about the history of American politics and elections. And first, we have Professor Scott Gack. He's an undergraduate and graduate director of American Studies and associate professor of history and American Studies at Trinity College. And we also have with us Matthew Lebo, who's the professor and department chair and at the Department of Political Science at the University of Western Ontario. Thank you so much for both of you to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'd like to have Edward join back into the conversation and
sure.
Take it forward. So I wanted to ask both of you, historically, let's compare today's elections to elections of the past. What are your thoughts after taking in the news today?
Well, one of the things that certainly struck me, and Edward already kind of raised this, right, is certainly the issue of voting rights and the reformulation of access to polling places that has taken place in ways that have really deep historical roots, but also kind of shorter or medium term kind of historical roots. Going back to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and what we're seeing is kind of almost a slow chip away at ballot access. You would think, and the United States would have by now figured out a way, right, to provide everybody with very equal and fair access to voting, but that is certainly not the case at this time.
I'll add this is really interesting thinking about the 2024 presidential election, and that's just very unusual, or it's totally new that we're thinking about tonight as the setup for how electoral votes will be counted in 2024. It's, we imagine that a presidential candidate wins a state when they get the most votes in the state, and that state then sends their slate of electors to Washington, and they're counted for the person who won the most votes in that state. And that's not how it's going to work in 2024. So now we're imagining that a presidential candidate, to win a state's electoral votes, needs to get the most votes in that state, and probably needs to have a Secretary of State and a governor and a state legislature that agrees that the person who got the most votes actually got the most votes. So a state like Arizona that Joe Biden won in 2020, if Carrie Lake wins tonight and becomes the Republican governor, then it's really doubtful that she would agree to send a slate of Democratic electors to DC. So immediately the 2024 election and worries about how it can function and how it can function without violence are coming into view.
So let me ask you both a question. If you look at states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, you just noted that if someone is in charge of those states that doesn't want to acknowledge or accept the election results, they could potentially just refuse to allow those electors to move forward to DC to certify a president in 2 years. Is there any historical precedent for something like this happening? If it were to happen, is there any historical precedent where you just had so many candidates running who openly were indicating they were willing to not allow free election results to stand? What do you think in terms of history? And also, how do you think this would play out practically if this were actually to happen in 2 years? I'm imagining lawsuits galore, potentially violence in the streets. What does history tell us about how this could play out? And that's for both of you.
That's a tough one, though.
There are two things that come to mind when you mention that, and one is kind of the presidential scenario, right? The 1876 election, which is contested, but not in the way that we're talking about it now. Not in a manner in which people just kind of are willing to deny actual results, but rather results that are so close. And it's so difficult, right? Then you start kind of battling, right, over which ballots have to be recounted and counted again. Think more of a Bush and Gore scenario, right? Of recounts and battling over ballots in that way of denying an election, if you would, rather than the current slate. And the other kind of election scenario leans more towards violence and the overthrow of government in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, where Democratic candidates had lost a free and fair election and then literally overturn it, right? Throw out Republican, again, mainly black supporter Republican government, overthrow the city's government, right? And that scenario also rings true to this political moment.
And how it would work in 2024 is really difficult to say. You also have just the undercurrent of conspiracy theories, denial about the 2020 election, a loss of faith in institutions and electoral institutions, and the negative partisanship, the negative feelings that people have about the other party. And so tonight we'll see, I think a Trumpian behavior by Carrie Lake in Arizona, who will either win the election or claim that it was stolen from her. And when we get to 2024 and a presidential candidate, especially if Donald Trump complains that a state was stolen, there will be 30, 40, 50% of the people in that state who will believe it. And then the potential for violence is there. And what we saw on January 6th, 2021, that something like that could be repeated, or could occur in individual states as state legislatures are appointing the slate of electors, effectively deciding who won the state.
It's actually for that reason that I'm kind of really curious about the New Hampshire Senate race, where Bolduc in the primaries was what we've now just dubbed like an election denier, and then after the primaries, right, as a clear part of his strategy, has refuted his election denial and repositioned himself in the more general facing election. And so those kind of shifts are kind of they're fascinating in one aspect and terrifying in another.
I think Hannah had a question.
Yes, my question was, some of these governor races are also historical. There are a lot more women running for offices. So let's discuss some of these governor positions around the country.
Well, Arizona's a big one. I am thinking about the presidential election in 2024, and so Arizona's a big one, and Kari Lake is a very Trump-like figure. There's close to where I am is the Michigan race, and that could be quite close. And Michigan's a state that voted for Trump in 2016 and voted for Biden in 2020, and will likely be close again in 2024. And in an off-year election like this, a Republican could win it. And if that happens, then the state is poised for more restrictive abortion rights. That the state of Michigan can swing quite right for being a state that's so evenly divided. But there are a lot of strong women candidates, and I think that especially that opens up the pool quite a bit for presidential candidates in 2024. I can see Kari Lake running for the Republican nomination, or at least feeling out the possibilities while things settle in with how popular Trump will be on the Republican side.
So look, we're about to discuss this issue of how to prevent election violence. Before we do, professors, I just want to give you all one more chance to comment on the final issue here, which is that we are seeing now some court cases being fought about the legality of absentee ballots that have flaws in them. We know Congress just a few months ago, I think, passed legislation to change the way the electoral count is done. Can you tell us about any of the legal changes that have occurred since 2020, either efforts to shore up the election process or efforts to restrict the right to vote, and how those changes might play out? Anything you want to share on that, either one of you?
Well, I could start with, a lot of states have tried and passed stricter voter identification laws, and those have the effect of making it harder for a lot of people to vote. Voter ID is, to say that you need an identification card to buy liquor, you should have one to vote, sounds like a really simple proposition, but the barriers that are put up so for people to get that ID are really nefarious. There's if you looked at a map of where you can get a driver's license in Georgia, it maps very well with where the Black population of Georgia lives. And that those areas don't have places to get driver's licenses, and where they do, they have very restricted hours, and they're barriers to vote, and they make it much harder, of course, for people to vote, but then it makes it impossible for some people to vote, and so the voting population is diminished that way. It's just it's sometimes referred to as the new Jim Crow, and so voter identification is a big area, and then the translation of votes into electoral college votes, I think, has not been shored up by the Democrats in Congress, and they just did not have enough support to put in stronger legislation.
At the same time, we've also had, part of these new restrictions have come in response to the opening up of early voting in several states, mail-in votes, which of course came in during the pandemic largely out of necessity, but which many states have sought to sustain and provide more access, and they do provide obviously more access, and the idea of extended voting sessions rather than just having a single day, being able to vote in advance of what is officially dubbed Election Day is, also becoming an increasing possibility. It's a real genuine battle that's going on right now about how we vote, and historically, and as well as today, there's always a kind of battle over who gets to vote.
Yeah, Absolutely. Now that one has been going on for a long time, well into our history, as I'm sure you both can attest. So let's bring on our next guest, Matthew and Scott. Professor, both of you stay with us, please. But let's also bring in now Dr. Frederick Eccles, who is the CEO of Cure Violence Global. He came to this organization from St. Louis, where as health commissioner and acting health director, he had oversight responsibilities for the Cure Violence program. We would like to talk to him about the threat of violence in these elections and after these elections, and what we as a community, as a country, can do to prevent further repeats of the violence that we saw on January 6th, that we saw in Nancy Pelosi's house, and we've seen elsewhere. Dr. Eccles, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, excellent. So start off by telling us what are your concerns about violence during election season? Have you seen any examples of this that concern you? Just what are you worried about? And then we'll talk about, what can be done to prevent it.
Yeah, after the 2020 election, that was a prime evidence of what we can potentially expect in the future. The political division has become more apparent and more palpable over the last couple of years, especially with the rhetoric that has been shared among elected officials and laypersons in the community. And so one of the things that we have to be mindful of is, not only voter safety, but how do people have conversations and engagements around political issues in a way that's safe and productive. So even beyond today, which is where we're holding the midterm elections, when people are holding discussions within their homes, with their families, friends, and other members of their network, we really want them to be able to do so in a manner that is safe.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hannah, back to you, please. Any questions you want to ask?
Yes, experts were telling us that we would see violence at the polls. What are you all seeing or hearing about that you can share with our audience?
Yes, I think, because of the issues that have occurred since January 6th of 2020, people are really concerned about their safety at the polls, and that has been a deterrent for individuals, even for the midterm elections. So luckily, we have states like Washington where they have mail-in ballots, but in some other jurisdictions, they don't. Citizens aren't afforded that particular that option, and so some individuals have not gone to the polls because they're afraid for their safety. But we have seen jurisdictions increase security efforts to make sure people feel safer going to the polls. But safety is a major issue, and it's unfortunate because we have a constitutional right that some individuals feel like they're being robbed of because of, again, the political division that has occurred over the last couple of years.
Doctor, let me ask you this question. How do we close Pandora's box? Because it seems like the violent political rhetoric now has been unleashed. You've actually seen open violence and political leaders just accepting it. And, it's not like this has never happened in America before, right? I mean, in the 1960s, political assassinations were disturbingly common. But, since then, there's been relative calm, peaceful transfers of power. You haven't seen politicians being attacked or killed for the most part. How do we get back to a place where we can disagree without engaging in violence and disagree without threatening violence? What does your organization suggest about how we as individuals and as political leaders, et cetera, get to a better place?
That's a great question. So as individuals, we all have our own a level of responsibility to reduce the likelihood that violent incidents can occur related to issues related to political discussions. So one thing that we always advise people to do is be aware of their surroundings, be aware of the situation. If the situation is escalating, we ask them to really take a moment to center themselves and to de-escalate themselves internally, and also be willing to agree to disagree. Oftentimes, with political division, individuals just want to feel validated, and so if you aren't willing to validate them, sometimes it's better just to agree to disagree, and move on. But in some cases, violence does occur, and so we need people to call 911 or the emergency service to respond in the event that a violent incident does occur. But also, if you're at the polls, there's also you can report it to your local electoral board so that they can do the proper follow-up and institute additional measures to improve safety for that jurisdiction.
What can we, Professor, what can we expect if the results aren't announced? And if it might take days or weeks even for election results to be announced. Do you expect violence to occur then?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I was wondering, what are you expecting as the election results? Experts are saying it might take days or weeks for the election results to be announced. So, are you expecting violence at the to occur as it takes more and more days for the poll results to come out?
Well, the likelihood of violence occurring is there. We've heard comments from some of the some of the candidates about their willingness or unwillingness to accept the result if they are not the candidate, if they're not declared the winner, and so that can lead to additional issues, especially if they have a large following that has adopted a lot of the rhetoric that has been shared over the last few years, and so the likelihood of additional violent incidents occurring as the results come out is very real. And so we need jurisdictions to really be prepared to handle those situations if they were to occur.
So I'll jump in really quick, Ken, and just share that we are getting some election results in. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis has apparently won re-election by a significant margin. Senator Marco Rubio has defeated Val Demings in that Senate race as well. And everything else seems like it's too close to call, any that's competitive anyway. So professors, back to you, to Scott and Matthew. What are you going to be looking at as the night goes on? What states in particular are you going to be looking at to determine whether or not our history of peaceful transfers of power will continue in 2024 and beyond? Any particular states that you're worried about or you have your eyes on? I know we've talked about Arizona. Any others of particular attention that you all are looking at? Scott, go ahead, and then Matthew.
Well, I do think you have to go back to Michigan, where, of course, the governor did already face a serious plot, right, to kidnap Governor Whitmer. So I mean, you have to of course put that into focus a bit. As you mentioned, there's already Arizona. I was going to say in response to Dr. Eccles before, it just made me think of something that is, in revolutionary America, Maryland and several other states, but Maryland banned guns from election sites. I mean, because they thought it was going to influence, right, the polling process. And so, like, there is policy available for us to somewhat start to to address some of the issues that are taking place.
I'll say that tonight I'm watching really most closely the Senate races in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada. I based on a lot of polling and the results coming in so far, I think Republicans are going to win back the House. And so you're looking at perhaps Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House and all sorts of investigations of Biden and obstruction and really contentious politics. If the Democrats could hold on to the Senate, then that would be a very big win for the Democrats. It would mean that the president could still appoint people. If a vacancy would open up with the Supreme Court, then President Biden would be able to do that. If a cabinet post became vacant, he could fill that. And if and when Speaker McCarthy passes articles of impeachment against Joe Biden, then the trial in the Senate would not be as would be much abbreviated if Democrats managed to hold on to the Senate. So to do that, the Democrats just need to break even on the night there, or they want to end up the night with the same 50, not the same 50, but 50 seats just as they started the night. If they win in Pennsylvania, which is the one of those three I think they're most likely to win, then they're +1. And Nevada and Georgia are just super close. And so if Warnock can stay ahead in Georgia, then that makes it tough for Republicans to come back. There's also races in New Hampshire that are closer than I thought they would be. But I think if Democrats win 2 out of 3 of Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada, they'll hold on to the majority. And that's about as optimistic as I could get on behalf of the Democrats.
Thank you, Jim. I'll toss it back to Hina.
What role is social media and political pundits playing in our elections? I'd like to get your thoughts on those.
Matthew, go ahead and start us off, and then Scott.
Sure. A tremendous role. The two sets of partisans in the United States are living seemingly in alternate realities that are reinforced by their social networks and their online presence. A person on Facebook who's considered themselves a Republican, has Republican friends, will see Republican news feed and all sorts of semi-news or not quite news sites that Democrats will never see. And so you have two different groups of people just totally seeing reality differently. The state of the economy, what the president is doing, immigration issues, and there's the days of everybody watching the same three newscasts and processing them perhaps differently. Those are gone, and you can surround yourself with like-minded people online, and nothing breaks through that partisan your partisan lenses, that shield of your predispositions.
I mean, social media has created a culture of celebrity beyond which anybody ever imagined, right? Where both, and it is very much intertwined, right, with wealth, and kind of access to these, even though they're supposed to be very democratic platforms, they tend to function undemocratically in many situations. It is, I think everybody acknowledges it as somehow problematic, but we haven't really figured out ways to pull ourselves out of our isolative bubbles, right, and start to talk across these alternate realities that were just mentioned, right? Those conversations, right? Social media is not built to create those conversations.
Dr. Eccles, go ahead.
I'm sure. So the social media has been a tool that's been used to incite violence, whether you're talking about firearm-related violence or political violence. And so a lot of the rhetoric that we have been talking about earlier spreads like wildfire over social media. And so it's really difficult to control that. One, because it's, we can't violate individuals' constitutional right with, freedom of speech or freedom of language. And so it's really important for individuals to be mindful of what they're posting, because what we post also has influence and can influence the behavior of others, especially if we are sharing information that is dangerous. And so it's really important for just people to really be mindful of what they're posting, how they're posting it, and also who's paying attention to the information that they're sharing on these platforms.
Well, thank you all. We're going to take a brief break right now. I don't think all of you are staying, but everyone just stay for now. We'll see who's staying. But Dr. Eccles, professors, thank you so much for joining us, and we appreciate your perspective. We'll take a brief break, and we'll be back with you all shortly.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Again, we want to thank Dr. Eccles for his time. We also want to thank Professor Lebo for his time. And I think we have Professor Gack still with us, correct? Excellent. Good. All right. So then let's continue on. We're getting more results in. I think for those of you who are watching your feeds, in addition to Governor DeSantis, Senator Rubio winning, Massachusetts has elected its first female governor, Maura Healey. Other states, results are coming in very tight. Nothing quite clear yet. So, we shall see as more results come in. But so far, no big surprises. There was an expectation that DeSantis would emerge victorious in Florida. That has happened. Massachusetts obviously expected to go Democratic. That has happened. Results are coming in Georgia, in Michigan, and elsewhere, but everything is too close to call. So with that, let's bring on our next guest to join Professor Gak. Hina, do you want to do the honors?
Yes. So let's get Rafiuddin Ahmed. He is the chair of the Muslim Council of Virginia and the executive director of the Muslim Association of Virginia, which hosted voting right on their massive campus in Manassas. So welcome, Rafi.
Thank you.
And I believe we're also welcoming on, in addition, Reverend Graylin Scott Hagler of Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ, and he's the director of faith strategies there. Reverend, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So let's dive in. Hannah, go ahead, please. First question.
Well, thank you both for being here. So we're going to be talking about voting rights. Just today in a group chat with other Muslim women talking about voting, someone asked, this was a person who had newly immigrated to the United States, and they were extremely surprised. This was their first election. Why U.S. does not, U.S. elections, you don't need an ID to go in and vote. And so there was a lot of back and forth, and I'd love to get your perspective on this. Why doesn't the U.S., why is it not a good idea to have IDs presented at the voting booth?
Well, one of the things is that the way in which IDs get identified can be discriminatory in itself. And that is poor folks in terms of elderly, folks like that. The fact that you're on the voting rolls and that you qualified to get on the voting rolls should be identification enough. When I walk in there, I have to identify myself, my address, who I am, where I live. And if it matches up the rolls, then I'm able to vote. So that's an identification. But I don't need to have an identification in my pocket that I got to show somebody because that has been always used to discriminate against people from voting.
Oh, Hina, you're muted.
And it would be marginalized people who would not have the IDs. Getting a real ID can cost upward of $175 for people living paycheck to paycheck. They are the ones who will be most affected. Rafi, what was the turnout like at your site, and what were your reflections after today?
Good evening, first of all. Our mosque is the very first polling station in Virginia. There has not been another mosque in the state of Virginia that has been a polling station. We only have about 807 registered voters in the precinct that we're in. Out of that, approximately about 250 people came in to vote. And this was people of all faith. So it was an excitement for our community, especially those who live close to our mosque, to be able to come in and vote there. And it was a moment of pride also for them. And I'm hoping that this, us becoming a polling station has motivated other Muslims, not only in our county, but throughout Virginia, to go out and vote and make a difference.
Great.
So go ahead, Hannah.
Oh, go ahead, Edward.
No, please, Hannah. I'm fascinated. So you carry on.
So my next question to both of you, actually to Edward too, why is the Justice Department sending monitors to ensure voting rights in 24 states? What's going on?
That's a good question. I'll defer to maybe Professor Gak to go first, then we'll walk our way around.
I want to ask you to repeat the question. I was adjusting my camera at the time.
Sure. My question is, why is the Justice Department sending monitors to 24 states to ensure voting rights? What is going on?
Well, I mean that you almost answered your own question, right? To ensure voting rights is certainly front and center of why the federal government sends monitors into these situations. I know there were reports in at least one state from the ACLU today where voters were being instructed by poll workers that they had to vote a full party line, right? You couldn't mix and match, if you would, your votes between political parties. You had to vote a full party line. You know, those types of scenarios are just some of the kind of softer ways of intimidating voters. There are certainly more drastic ones, and we haven't heard yet, you know, kind of the mechanisms that are going on today. But we can be pretty confident that in some of these places, right, there are definitely, you know, measures that are illegal according to U.S. election law at this time.
Other thoughts, gentlemen, on that question from anyone else?
Well,
Go ahead.
There's a long history in the United States of voter suppression, of illegal tactics, of even right after Reconstruction, to dismantle Reconstruction in the United States, terrorism was employed to kill people who wanted to vote, to threaten them. They were called the Red Shirts in North Carolina. And so you saw shades in Arizona and other states of armed people camped outside of polling places, again, as a throwback to what took place during Reconstruction in order to dismantle it. And so you have the same kind of scenario that is going on. History is repeating itself. Clearly, it's good that the Justice Department got involved because, you know, there's been a deliberate dismantling of the Voting Rights Act to take all the teeth out of it, to make sure that it is no longer really enforceable in terms of the things that would basically hold states accountable. And so there's a need in order to continue to focus upon that, because there is an issue of legality. There's an issue of history, and particularly of white supremacist history in terms of denying people the right to vote.
Absolutely. So, moving on to the issue of voting rights in general, how do you all expect voting rights might be impacted based on how this election turns out? For example, there was a push in Congress to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, to pass other attempts to change or strengthen the way that elections are run at the local, national level. Any expectations you have of how the right to vote might change, either for the better or for the worse, depending on how this election turns out? Brother Abdul, maybe you can go first, then we'll work our way around. Not sure, Brother Abdul, could he hear me? So if not, then maybe Reverend, you want to go in, then Professor Gack.
Yeah, I think if the right wing wins, if the right wing prevails, you're going to see more attempts to restrict voting rights, who can vote. Because what happened in the previous election, the presidential election, was the real complaint was not that the election was hijacked or unfair. It was the fact that people of color, particularly Black folks, voted, who, in the estimation of many, should not have a right to vote and decide on who can hold office. And so that made it, to all of their minds, an illegitimate election. And so, again, we continue to expect the rolling back of voting rights, just like you criminalize people to bring aid to elderly who are standing in voting lines. To bring them water is to come under basically infraction of the law. Well, that's an issue. And we're going to see more of that if this right-wing white supremacy prevails.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to echo what was just said. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, I think is pretty much dead at this point. Especially if the House proceeds in the direction that the predictions have held true, that Republicans are going to take control, it's over. And I think it's one of the sad failings of this administration and the Democratic Party, having been in power for 2 years, is to not really shore up the election process as to make sure that people have fair and free access, right, to vote. And that in the long run is going to be far more detrimental than perhaps anything else, or anything that they actually passed is going to look pale in comparison to this failure.
Rafi, do you have any thoughts on this, especially since Prince William County and the cities of Manassas and Manassas Park where monitors were sent as well, and there's threats been made to citizens there. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Being in Virginia, I haven't really heard too many complaints coming from the county that I live in Prince William County. I suppose maybe southern parts of Virginia, this may be an issue, but where I live, Fairfax and Prince William County, it hasn't really been a big issue. And at least within the Muslim community, I have personally not received any complaints of someone not being able to vote. So this really hasn't been a big issue for our community.
Well, that's good to hear. And I think so far we're hearing nationwide is not any major, certainly no incidents of violence for the most part that we've heard about during Election Day so far. There have been some issues with access in Maricopa County in Arizona. There are some issues. They're having their technical issues. And we've seen that online, people are already trying to use this to imply there's a conspiracy, there's an attempt to suppress the Republican vote or anyone's votes. Can you all speak to Professor Yak and others about the threat of conspiracy theories and conspiracy theories leading to, bad laws or even violence, and the risk that could percolate if it takes a long time to count ballots? Is anyone concerned about that? And is there anything that can ever be done about that? Because sometimes, especially now we have mail-in ballots, it just takes time to count, right? It's nothing nefarious. It's just the way the process works. Now, 200 years ago, no one had a problem with waiting a few days or weeks to find out who won an election. But now we all expect instant gratification, and people's minds start going in crazy directions. We don't get it. So any thoughts on that, Professor, historically compared to now, and how we can address that issue? And then same for the Reverend and Brother Abdul Wahid as well.
Well, first I'd say that actually, there are states as part of this larger battle about voting and voting access that have limited, right, the ability of election officers to count votes, mail-in votes ahead of time, right? So that has automatically delayed and will undoubtedly also cause frustration with mail-in ballots or the expansion of mail-in ballots, because they literally can't start to process them until the polls have closed on election day, whereas other states actually do allow election workers, right, to begin to count votes before election day. And start to process what can be literally millions of votes, and it is can be an arduous process. So on that end, right, this is part of the larger voting access and rights conversation. In terms of conspiracy theories or just theories in general, right, about the fairness of an election, certainly these kind of ideas, these conspiracies can very much lead to violent activity. They already have, and there's good reason to think that kind of the delay in counting votes can help exacerbate that, particularly with social media, helping to fan the flames, particularly with what we expect is going on right now with continued foreign interference with our kind of election through social media. Those things help flame the fires, right? Help increase divisions, and we've seen time and again in the last few years, we've seen these scenarios, boil over into violent activity.
Hannah, you have to unmute yourself. No, still muted, Hannah. Okay, while Hannah works out technical difficulties, it's not live TV unless there's at least one technical difficulty. So, and the producers will sort that out. So, Reverend, let me go to you. We are seeing more people of faith, I think, running for office. It used to be actually a common sight to see Catholic priests serving in Congress. You maybe not remember this if they're my age, but the Catholic Church eventually said, no, don't do that anymore. So you don't necessarily see pastors or reverends running as often. But are you noticing that? Any increase in people of faith becoming more engaged politically, running for office, or encourage people to run for office? Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or do you think people of faith are being maybe used? What are your thoughts on the involvement of people of faith in politics?
In the Black community, there's been a long history of clergy running for office. That has been apparent. John Lewis himself was a preacher. And so you go around, you look at who was elected during Reconstruction, the number of clergy that was a part of held office in Reconstruction. Adam Clayton Powell out of the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, in New York City, congressman. You can go down, you can look at the sort of the rich history of clergy, particularly out in the Black community, being in office and representing their communities. One of the things I want to just say, though, is that we can talk about conspiracy theories out there, and there's going to be conspiracy theories because basically it is a climate in this country where people really feed into the idea of conspiracies, and conspiracies basically against the so-called dominant culture. That's a part of this replacement ideology that has been created, where the idea that the global South is going to overrun the global North and going to replace white European folk with people who are brown, people who are Black, people who are Muslim, people who come from other faiths, other places. That is the ideology that's been fostered in Europe, particularly in France. Marine Le Pen was one of those. It's fostered in the United States. Right now, I'm not so much worried about the conspiracy theories because they're going to be there. What I'm worried about is a number of these folks who are running for office that are proponents of Christian nationalism, that basically believe that the United States of America should be declared a Christian country. And I, as a Christian minister, I got to ask, whose Christianity are they talking about? Are they talking about the Christianity of the slave master? Or they're talking about the Christianity of the slave? Are they talking about the Christianity of the oppressor or the Christianity of the oppressed? And once you begin to talk about being a Christian country, that really by its own definition means that anybody who's not Christian is relegated to a secondary or third level in the country. And that's what we got to really begin to look at. DeSantis is one of the proponents of Christian nationalism. Mastriano is one of the proponents of Christian nationalism. Abbott is one of the proponents of Christian nationalism. Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham, is one of the proponents of Christian nationalism. You go right on down the line. There's a long list of people. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a proponent of Christian nationalism. So what I'm looking at is there's a real danger that is before us right now. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's a reality.
That's a fascinating point, Reverend. It's ironic because we as Muslims, many people of faith would not mind government being more moral in the policies that they implement and pursue. But when you start converting religion into a racist ideology and selectively picking what morality you want to enforce and who you're going to enforce it on, that's when you have chaos and danger and immorality erupt. So very noted points there. Hannah, back to you. Let's see. We have the tech problem solved yet?
Yes. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Great. I did want to say that there was one serious incident of violence in the suburb of Milwaukee, where a 38-year-old man was arrested after threatening voters with a knife. And this briefly caused the polling station to be closed. So that's just something he demanded the staff stop the voting. And so he was arrested without incident and no injuries were reported. So that's just a report on violence. I did want to take our guests back to when the difference between conspiracy theories and active interference by overseas governments. The federal government had warned ahead of this election that Russia was working to amplify doubts about the integrity of the US election. We have reports of China supporting candidates that would go easy on Beijing. So this is for real. So how do we sift through the conspiracy theories and actually look at foreign interference in US elections?
Well, I think I know that foreign interference in the U.S. elections are real, but I also know that U.S. interference in foreign elections is also real. But this is counter espionage.
Yeah.
Right? That's what's going on. So let's be honest about it, right? It's not just Russia. It's not just China. It's the U.S. in places like Iran, in places like Iraq, over and over again, trying to put in power the people that are palatable to Western interests.
You can always count on reverends engaged in politics to keep it real, as they say. Professor Gag, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, the Reverend raises an interesting point, right? Which is that our government, our intelligence agencies have a long history of, by their own admission, trying to tilt elections or even overthrow elected governments overseas when they're not friendly to American interests. I mean, and yet many people still look up to America as kind of the beacon of democracy around the world. How do you reconcile those two things? How do you think the rest of the world learns from our history, mimics our history, or tries to avoid some of the bad parts of our history and kind of ignores the hypocrisy of some of what we do?
Well, yeah, that hypocrisy, that used to drive leaders in the Soviet Union crazy, right, during the 1950s, let's also say it's pretty much all of South America and Central America that the United States has also interfered in elections in one way or another as well. It's sometimes the sometimes some of these incidences have or some of these U.S. policies that are somewhat, or not even somewhat, that are very anti-democratic, have been taken up as role models for authoritarian governments around the world, and so. We have not only provided kind of democratic models, we've also provided anti-democratic models, and so in terms of where we kind of started this conversation, I would say, hey, we need to focus on our own elections, and provide and let's have some kind of national standards of what it is to have free and fair access to voting, but we seem a long way away from that conversation.
Rafi, any thoughts you want to share on that? I mean, I think in the Muslim community in particular, we are well aware of the United States not supporting democratic movements in Muslim majority countries, and in fact, sending money overseas to prop up dictators who are vehemently opposed to letting their people vote in elections. Any thoughts on how we as Muslim Americans kind of look at that dichotomy between our government and the free elections we get to participate in, and then what is happening overseas?
Definitely, there's a disparity between how the Muslim nations are treated versus other European nations. So there's definitely a strong sentiment within the Muslim country. I was born in Pakistan, and many Pakistanis believe that there was a regime change of a duly elected government, and they believe that orders came from within the United States. Now, how true that is, I am not sure, but people do believe that's what happened. And the previous Prime Minister of Pakistan does say that he intercepted a letter that was sent from the American ambassador to the opposition leaders. So we know that the interference from our country does happen in other nations, and we know that what happened in Egypt and some of the other nations where duly elected governments were removed, and oppositions were placed in, because they think they would be much more friendlier to the United States than the elected body. So that is there. And, and to be honest with you, our struggle within the Muslim community is a little bit different because we are, still first and second generation Muslims. Like Edward, in your case, it's different, but I'm talking about immigrant Muslims that migrate to this nation. Getting them to participate in the civic process, that is a struggle. And I think, our mosque becoming a polling station is a positive step towards that. And because of that, we're hoping that it's going to motivate others to, get more involved. And as you were saying earlier, there's many reverends who are, within the African American community who are running for elections. Our struggle is trying to find capable people who just run for election, period. Whether if they are religious or not, or if they're part of the religious leadership or not, is a different story. But in reality, we have a lot to learn from the African American community, especially we feel as Muslim that we are dealing with Islamophobia, and how the African American community, especially through the civil rights era, won a lot of the rights that we are, enjoying the fruits of right now. I believe that I have the right to vote right now because of the sacrifices that the African American leaderships did, during the civil rights era. So we're still way behind some of the other minority groups, but we're fast learners. We're paying attention, and we're trying to catch up.
And I believe you have quite a few Muslim Americans running for office around the country right now. And if I may be so biased, we're hoping to see not as representation, because representation by itself doesn't really matter. What you need is principle representation, right? Whether someone's Muslim, Black, Jewish, Christian, seculars, whatever, but a principled person who will stand up for what is right and against what is wrong. So with that, it's 9 o'clock, so we're going to take a break now. I want to thank Professor Gack. I want to thank Reverend, both of you, for joining us tonight. Hope you have a great rest of your evening. So I assume you might be staying up late watching the results come in. But thank you so much for joining us. And Rafi, you're going to stay with us for a bit longer, I believe, and then we'll bring on some additional guests after this break. So thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Have a great night.
Blessings.
Same to you. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Chardell.
Yeah, here. Can you just type it? Welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're ready to continue.
Edward?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm going to be reading the rest of the news bulletin. If you could give me a few minutes before
Sure, go ahead.
the next guest to join in. Thank you so much. Several voters in Atlanta, Georgia area face the possibility of being unable to participate in the midterm election. That's due to an oversight with absentee ballots. As a result, they filed a lawsuit in Superior Court to resolve the issue. According to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, election officials in Cobb County admitted on Friday that they did not send absentee ballots to over 1,000 voters who had requested them. 4 affected voters and the Cobb County Democracy Center, a voter education organization, filed a lawsuit on Sunday. They asked a judge to order those ballots be sent by overnight mail and to extend the state's deadline for returning them. Cobb County residents should not be stripped of their vote and their voice in government due to their ballot being mailed out late, attorney Poi Winichukau of the Southern Poverty Law Center told the newspaper. Now let's go to Florida. On Monday afternoon, the Miami Herald reported that a Florida man was sent a new voter ID card shortly after being charged with voter fraud. Nathaniel Singleton was issued the document by Broward County's election supervisor on September 13th. Singleton is ineligible to vote because of a second-degree murder conviction. The Herald's report added that the incident occurred nearly a month after the governor, Ron DeSantis, held a high-profile news conference touting Singleton's arrest for voter fraud. In the second case, Florida's resident Ramona Oliver was also arrested for voter fraud. Yet 3 months after she registered to vote, her name is still on the rolls. The 2 cases follow DeSantis' highly publicized establishment of an election police force responsible for rooting out election fraud in the last few weeks. The Herald said the incidents also reflect dysfunction within the governor's Department of State, which is responsible under state law for finding and removing ineligible voters from the rolls. Now we're going to talk about spending in midterm campaigns. As the midterm campaign comes to a close, spending records for federal and state elections are getting smashed, the New York Times reports. Attack ads, salaries, and get out the vote efforts surpassed $16.7 billion. According to the Times report, 5.4% of the money spent on federal races had come from billionaires. The most expensive race is in Georgia. That's where Senator Raphael Warnock is defending a seat that he won for Democrats in a fateful special election not even 2 years ago, the Times reports. Republicans have slammed Democrats as out of touch when it comes to issues such as inflation, crime, and immigration. A mosque in Chicago, Illinois, has been set up as a polling place. More in this report by Saliha Farouk. Should we continue? Okay. While we're waiting for that report,
this is Villa Park, a suburb of Chicago, Illinois. Midterm elections 2022 are here, and America is voting today. Churches and synagogues, along with schools, have been a voting place for a while. Now many mosques are becoming polling places as well. This is the Islamic Foundation, House of God. Muslims come here 5 times a day to pray. In their prayers, they say, Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim. Lead us along the straight path. Today, everyone here has the opportunity to lead their country along the straight path by voting. Here is the Imam of the Islamic Foundation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is your brother Nu'man Hussein at the Islamic Foundation. Alhamdulillah, we are honored to be hosting the general elections here at the Islamic Foundation. What greater opportunity for us to be able to use our facility, to use our masjid as a place of not only connecting in worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also using our opportunity and our resources to vote individuals in that will help our community, that will uplift our people, that will become the voice for the voiceless. So, alhamdulillah, I encourage all Muslims, I encourage all people to make sure that they are participating in this election and future elections as well, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us with leaders that will be good for us and that will bring khair and blessings for our community and uplift those that in our community that are struggling, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Being a good neighbor and being a good citizen is made a bit easier by this mosque. This
Over to you, Edward.
Thank you so much, Hina. I believe we are now going to welcome on the founder of Muslim Network TV, Imam Malik Mujahid, correct, producer? There he is. Assalamu alaikum, Imam.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How are you doing?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. How are you?
All right. Do we have some results? I mean, election is about results, isn't it? Where are the results?
Yeah, they're coming in slowly but surely, Imam. I think as you've seen, it looks like in Texas, the Republicans will emerge victorious there. That's just news coming out. Looks like in Georgia, Brian Kemp is leading Stacey Abrams, Raphael Warnock leading Herschel Walker. But numbers are still coming in. No one has really definitively said for sure where any of the key close races are going to fall. We only so far are seeing results from states where we kind of had an inkling what was going to happen, like Florida. So the numbers are coming in. We're going to be up late, I believe, inshallah.
Well, you're putting inshallah to it, and God willing, things are such which will lead our country to the right directions. I mean, there are a lot of challenges, high level of anxiety, but one of the things which I'm seeing is that after attack on Mr. Pelosi, people were concerned about violence, but it seems like those anxieties were unwarranted or at least people have prevailed who are sane, not much violence. Just one incident in which one person in Wisconsin was arrested with a knife. Other than that, nobody seems to have injured or hurt, or no bombs, no guns. So in terms of violence, it seems our country is doing better despite a whole lot of guns around us.
Yeah, I agree up to a point, Imam. I think the key thing will be what happens tomorrow, right? If any of these races are not called, if there starts to be debates about who won, I won, you won, that's when I think there's the danger of potential violence erupting when people don't accept the election results. The easy part, I think, was today. I think the key question is what happens tomorrow. And I think the fact that things were peaceful today is a hopeful sign for what will happen tomorrow. But we definitely need to see, will people accept election results, win or lose?
Well, that's $1 million question, and we will find out pretty soon.
Yes.
Those people who were saying it's fake elections, election is stolen, elections were illegitimate. If they win, definitely elections are legitimate, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the question, is after what happened in 2020, all bets are off. That was not a close race. President Biden won by a pretty significant margin in the Electoral College and in the popular vote, and yet that was still not accepted. And there's a large percentage of people in this country who don't accept that was a legitimate election. And so this is really a pivotal point, Imam, because, for most of American history, people accepted election results. That is what allowed our country not to collapse into chaos. And if that's not the case anymore, people aren't going to accept the results of Senate elections, gubernatorial elections, House elections, then chaos can very quickly take over this country. The oldest democracy in the world, could be in danger of losing that title if people do not accept election results anymore. So 2022, I think, is a real key testing ground for whether or not people are able to accept, winning or losing an election.
Although Republicans have already filed more than 100 cases, and some cases are filed by Democrats as well, voting seems to have gone okay. I mean, in Illinois, one Illinois county clerk says that an IT team found a cyber attack and they were able to stop that. And there were some machine issues in Arizona, which, some people ran with it, and there were more than 2.5 million people were watching that, one tabulating machine was not accepting defeat. And he gave public statement. It was all over about the election anxieties. Other than that, Texas, New Jersey, a bomb threat reported in Louisiana, but not much. I mean, it's pretty smooth elections. But as far as the results are concerned, do you think delay in results coming in will create more problems, or people will be patient until they see who won and who lost?
Well, go ahead, Emma.
Edward, before you answer that question, our next guest is here, Dr. Amina McLeod. She's the retired professor of Islamic Studies from DePaul University and a commentator, and runs her own show, Critical Talks, on Muslim Network TV. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Amina.
Wa alaikum salam. I'm enjoying listening to you all already.
All right. How are you doing, Amina?
Oh, I'm looking. I got the TV on right next to me, and sometimes I'm smiling. Other times I'm getting a little testy.
Okay. Tell me, President Biden is already flashing veto power. Do you think that's how the government is going to be in next couple of years?
Yeah. I'm not sure all of the things that are going to happen. It took me a while to come to the realization that we don't live in a democracy, that we live rather in a republic that has some peculiarities. And watching how the Senate, there is still very much of a money issue. And I worry about that money issue. That money is running races, forget what people stand for and what they're going to do for social justice or housing or economic reform. It's more an issue of, do you have the money to win?
Money counts, and that has been defining. And one money maker who has two operations starting with T, Tesla and Twitter, he's using his position to tell people how to vote.
I know, it's horrible. Everybody should get off Twitter.
Well, at least he's in front, you should appreciate. Otherwise, people give billions of dollars behind the scene without saying whom to vote, how to vote. This guy is up front. He wants you to vote.
Well, you got to admit he's honest.
He's an Obama Democrat who has turned a Trump Republican. What happened to him?
I don't know. All about rich people.
Well, you're in Maryland now. Left Chicago, and Maryland, thanks to your arrival there, has defeated, Republican governor, and now you have a Democratic governor. So, is that a big deal?
I really can't tell yet. Lots of elected officials at least in Baltimore and Baltimore County, are Democrats. They're still fighting the same wars that every other major area is. I can't tell because there's a very wealthy Maryland and a very, very impoverished Maryland. So I'm still trying. I haven't been here long enough to figure everything out. Working on it.
Okay. Well, there is a extraordinary news. 57% of votes counted already in Georgia Senate race. Warnock is leading by 51%. But of course, this is 57% vote counted. So margin now is plus 4%. It can change because still this is just 57% of the vote counted. So that I thought is significant. In Ohio, Tim Ryan is surprising. With 41% of the vote counted, he is leading by 50.6%. His campaign was strange. He distanced himself from President Biden and sort of, was sort of a moderate and sort of an independent Democrat type of a person. He ran an interesting campaign over there. So far, there are 5 races which will determine who will control Senate. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Ohio. At this moment, Arizona is not giving any totals or any numbers. Most likely votes have not closed there. But other 4 states, Democrats somewhat was reading, but it's still a whole lot of vote to be counted. What do you think, Edward? Do you think Democrats are right now quite nervous about losing both houses?
I think they're probably less nervous right now than they were when the night started. If you look at some of the early results that are coming in, they are promising in some place. For example, Reverend Warnock, Senator Warnock leading in Georgia. Even now, as more votes come in, that is somewhat promising for him, especially because some of the Democratic parts of Georgia return their votes in late. Same thing in Pennsylvania, that Fetterman is still leading Dr. Oz, potentially promising for Democrats there. And then Ohio, Tim Ryan, I still would expect him not to win just because of the tilt of that state. But the fact that he's doing as well as he is so far, that is somewhat surprising. So I do think Democrats are probably a little more hopeful right now than they were at the start of the night. However, the key thing is where things are a few hours from now. And the key thing also to look at states that haven't reported yet. So, for example, Arizona. They have to hold on to that Senate seat that Mark Kelly holds in order to keep the Senate. It becomes very difficult. Also, New York. There's some talk that the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, might lose to Lee Zeldin, who is a pretty far-right congressman, openly anti-Muslim congressman, who's running for governor there and made a big deal out of crime in that state. So that's an interesting case. And then also one state that people haven't talked enough about is Nevada. Nevada, there's a Democratic senator there, Senator Mastro, and she has been trailing in the polls to a Republican nominee. And again, if Democrats were to lose that state, it doesn't really matter what happens elsewhere. They are in serious trouble. So we still have a long night ahead of us to see what happens. But so far, I would say that it's very close, very, very neck and neck. And we really can't make any definitive predictions yet, except to say it's going to be close.
In Pennsylvania, Dr. Mehmet Oz, who is a Muslim, running against, as a Republican, running against a Democratic candidate, Fetterman. Fetterman is leading by 61.1%, although only 17% votes have been counted. I wonder how Muslim community there has voted when the first Muslim running for the Senate seat. Any ideas?
Well, there has been reporting about the local community there. And, what you've heard from community leaders is some skepticism about Dr. Oz, mainly because of his close relationship with President Trump, who, as we all know, was pretty openly hostile to Muslims and many other minority groups. And the fact that Dr. Oz is described as a secular Muslim, touted the fact that his children are apparently being raised as Christians. I mean, that sort of thing is obviously, made some people uncomfortable in the local Muslim community. But I do think that overall what you've heard is that people are just making their decision based on who they think is the best candidate for Pennsylvania, regardless of religion. If Dr. Oz does emerge victorious, he would be the first person who identifies as Muslim to be elected to the Senate. So that would be a history-making event. Maybe not the history, not the person many Muslims wanted to make that history, but that would be a history-making event in this country. And so the question will then become, what kind of senator would he be? Will he reflect the values in any way of the American Muslim community, or will he, simply be a politician who reflects the values of President Trump? That is certainly yet to be seen. But that's a very significant race there, both in terms of history and control of the Senate.
Well, can I ask both of you a question? Do you think that we have, as a community, a wide and extremely diverse community, focused on what we think is the best platforms?
Best platform in terms of a better political party, or what do you mean platform?
I mean, have we had meetings about values that we want to see represented in candidates, so that when someone like Oz comes up, I'm looking and listening to him, and frankly, he just made my hair stand on edge with some of his thoughts about many social issues, but also his closeness to Donald Trump.
And Amina, that's an excellent question. Before we answer that, we do have a few guests we want to bring in to join the conversation. We have Abdul Qadir Sino, Associate Professor of Political Science, Placement Director in the Political Science Department at Indiana University. Assalamu alaikum, Abdul Qadir. Welcome. Thank you for your patience.
Wa alaikum assalam. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. And let's also bring back Brother Rafi, who was here with us earlier. And Assalamu alaikum, Brother Rafi. So maybe we can take up the question that Amin just had, which was, do you think the Muslim community, in terms of our political decision making, has really been focused on supporting candidates whose values reflect the community, or has there been a focus on just representation, regardless of who's there, or people who are somewhat nice to Muslims, even if they may stand for very un-Islamic positions? Professor Sino, maybe you take that first, and we'll go to Brother Rafi.
Yes, of course. Well, the issue you raised is really important. When you think about Muhammad Oz, how did he become the Republican nominee? Which is a puzzle, really, because the Republican Party never, ever, hardly ever, there's only very, very few exceptions, nominates somebody as a candidate in a major election, if any election at all. And the reason is because evangelicals and other conservatives who are very set against Muslims in general are not likely to ever want to vote or be represented by somebody of a Muslim background. We just have very peculiar circumstances that led to this anomaly. And that's because Mr. Oz got the support of Mr. Trump. And so he was able to go around that barrier. And those conservatives who are torn between their loyalty to Mr. Trump and their Christian nationalist values, about which we have discussed before on the show, basically, held their nose and voted for Mr. Oz, more so than his rivals in the Republican primary. And now they're voting for him mostly in the general election. But the thing is, we as Muslim Americans have to think about, well, do we care? And many Muslims in Pennsylvania are thinking that, should they support a candidate who is beholden to a constituency who hold very strong anti-Muslim views, who are against diversity, who want to restrict civil rights and the ability of minorities to participate in elections, etc., etc., etc. And this is a clear case where the fact that the man has a connection to Islam culturally, regardless of how he interprets it, should not really outweigh what really matters, those values that we hold. Now, more generally speaking, however, we have only two choices, two parties, and then there are so many issues we care about as Americans, Muslims or otherwise. And of course, civil rights and the protection of our civil liberties are extremely important to us. But for some people, they may also be interested in economic issues, like businessmen, for example, maybe of Muslim background, or people who may feel, yes, I'm not convinced that I would need to support LGBTQ rights, and they may lean towards Republicans because of that. And so we have about 10% of Muslims who identify solidly as Republicans based on surveys that we have, and about 5 to 6 times more who identify as Democrats. and half of those who identify as Democrats are progressive Democrats. So a portion of the Muslim, substantial portion of the Muslim community were either progressives already or moved towards a progressive Democrat perspective about that values particularly everyone based on their humanity and no other characteristic. But others, we still have 10% who are conservative Muslims who, say conservative, I don't mean religiously, but I mean politically, who, because of economic reasons or because of other reasons, vote Republican strongly. And we need to have that conversation, and we need to continue to have this conversation in our community. What matters most? Economic matters are important, but frankly, I don't believe that they are more important than being recognized as part of the American fabric and how our full rights and representation in American society. We need a society that's accepting for everyone. If we want to be accepted ourselves, we have to accept everybody else. I was puzzled, for example, to see some in Michigan, Muslims talking against having books on LGBTQ identity in libraries. I mean, my perspective on this is that that's foolish, because if you don't want to have books on LGBTQ rights in the library, someday you will not have a Quran in the library as well, right? Because once you restrict the rights of any minority to express their views, even if you don't like them, next somebody else views will be restricted, and ultimately your own views will be restricted as well. And Muslims, as a marginalized group in society for a while, we should understand that.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts, Professor. Brother Rafi, let me take it to you, because I think we've touched on something that's, I think, an issue that is not talked about in public often, but is certainly discussed in the Muslim community. And that is, there are many Muslims who are very uncomfortable voting for Democrats these days because of some of the socially liberal positions the party has taken. The professor just mentioned the issue in Michigan. Muslim parents in Dearborn have actually said very clearly, our issue is not that there were books in the library about gay people. Our issue, there were books in the library with extremely graphic sexual material explaining how to engage in sex acts, how to use online gay hookup apps. And when they complained about this, the response from Democratic politicians would say, well, you're homophobes, and these books should be in the library. And there are many Muslims in Dearborn who said, we're not going to vote for Democrats. And that's kind of a unique situation in Dearborn. I haven't seen things escalate to that point of conflict elsewhere. But the Rafi, have you heard of this kind of conflict in the community, of this debate over whether or not the Democratic Party has gone too far on social issues, and whether or not that has put Muslims in a bind of who to vote for?
Yes, I hear that every day. I'll give you a perfect example. The last gubernatorial election in Virginia, the Democratic candidate was considered a very strong candidate. However, now we currently have a governor who is a Republican. And I think what led to this is because an effort was made in the school system try to refine their transgender bathroom policy. And one of the major county in Virginia, Loudoun County, what they did was they tried to implement a policy where a transgender can choose whichever bathroom they want to use. So, of course, boys are boys and their hormones are at the highest level in high school. And one boy, pretended to be a transgender and went into a girl's bathroom and raped a girl. So the school board tried to sweep that under the rug instead of suspending that kid, because they thought that was going to raise a political storm. So they transferred the child to another school. So this child goes and does the same thing at a different school. And because of that, there was a huge debate in Virginia about this issue. And the candidate who was considered a shoo-in to be our next governor again, Terry McAuliffe, during one of his campaigns, he made a comment that parents should not have a say in what is being taught in the school system. And so because of that, there was a rebellion. And now we have a governor, which is a Republican governor. Might I say that we have a very good relationship with this governor as well. And we have, we work with him very closely. And I want to remind one thing, I think as Muslims, we need to go back to what Tip O'Neill said a long time ago. All politics are local. We need to remember that. We need to make sure that we are independent voters. Yes, we should have lineage with the Democratic or the Republican Party, but we should never put all of our eggs in one basket. And unfortunately, as a Muslim community, we're doing that far too often. And even when it comes down to policies of where they seems like they're more concerned about the rainbow movement rather than being fair with all religious minorities and ethnicities and stuff. And I'm hearing this a lot, that many people are coming to me and saying, look, I didn't care about this until I had a child. Now this is this is what is the most important issue for me. And because of that, they're stepping away from the Democratic Party. And I hope the Democratic Party wakes up and realizes that there is such thing as Islamophobia also. Yes, there's a homophobia as well, but there's a huge factor which is called Islamophobia, and start paying attention to that as well. Not just worry about one segment of our society, but rather represent everyone.
Let's bring on a guest. Imam, we have one guest waiting in the wings for us. Rahila Ahmed is the Deputy Director for Fair Election Center's Campus Vote Project. Let's bring her into the conversation. Assalamu alaikum, Rahila. How are you?
Walaikum assalam. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you. And let's make sure Rahila just talk a little loud. You sounded a little faint. And let me turn over to the Imam, I think, who wants to start off the next part of the conversation.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. The conversation we just had, I hope you were able to hear that. Muslim community by and large voted Republicans in 2000 elections. And at that time, Al Gore declined to meet Muslim community. Governor Bush met and agreed to demand of Muslims to speak against profiling of Muslims and speak against the secret evidence. So at that time, social issues were not the reason Muslim voted. So what are you saying at this moment? Are Muslims in social media, they are debating these issues, but is it reflecting how Muslims are voting at this moment?
So I will say my experience and where I'm coming from is with working with Campus Vote Project. We're an organization that works in over 10 states to try and get young people out to vote, supporting college campuses and institutionalizing voting in the work that they do, and making sure that there's access to registration and to other issues like that. I've actually been spending my entire day today in a Zoom room, war room, with other folks from across the country, trying to identify some of the issues in voting that have been going on the field across the country. And so I can't speak specifically to the issues of Muslim youth, but I can speak to some of the issues of marginalized youth. We saw a lot of issues in terms of voter intimidation. We woke up this morning to the news of the 7 overnight arson attacks in Jackson, Mississippi, one of which occurred at an HBCU campus. And throughout the day, saw so many different instances of situations where student IDs were not taken seriously as voter IDs, where proofs of residency were being challenged or questioned by poll workers for students. And so when we're talking about what is the future for youth of color, for Muslim youth, for marginalized youth, we need to really be looking at access. We need to really be talking about how young people are interested and are active participants in our democracy, do come out to vote. And what does that mean in the grand scheme of things for our future if we're not promoting a narrative that is positive about what our young people are doing on the ground.
All right. Let me ask, our producer if we have Victor Ghalib Beg from Florida also available, because in Florida, governor, race is settled, and President Trump is already thinking of him as a challenge. So that will be something I would love to know. But Edward, tell us this thing. How in Georgia, you being based in Georgia, are you seeing Muslim candidates there? Because this is one aspect we haven't dwelled on. Are Muslim candidates actively involved?
Absolutely. So, as you all know, by day I'm the Deputy Director of CARE, and we are tracking nationwide about 145 Muslims who are running for various offices across the country. Here in Georgia, there are 4 Muslim Americans who are running for state legislative seats, and all of them actually seem to have a very good chance of emerging victorious in their elections. And so we are also tracking that to see what happens there. There's a possibility we'd have the first Muslim woman elected to the Georgia state legislature. We already have a Muslim man who was elected several years ago, State Senator Sheikh Rahman. So yes, there are 4 Muslims running. And what's interesting is that they've all, as far as we can tell, really been judged based on their policy positions. We have not seen a lot of Islamophobia, a lot of bigotry that you might have expected. That has happened in one of the races involving Ruha Roman, who is actually formerly of CARE Georgia. She has been targeted with some Islamophobia, but for the most part, her race, the other races, have just focused on the issues, debating issues in a fair way. And so I think that is itself a sign of progress for the American Muslim community, that they're able simply to run for election, and just be treated like any other politician. Even Mehmet Oz, in the community, there are many different thoughts about him, but the fact that he is someone who says he's a Muslim and was nominated by Republicans, and his religion has not really been a major issue in the campaign, that's something that would not have been the case, I think, 10 years ago. Even with Trump's endorsement years ago, I'm not sure he would have won because of the extent of Islamophobia. So I do think this election, no matter what happens, is showing that things are changing in terms of comfort level that the American people have with Muslim candidates. So yes, in Georgia, we look like we might have 4 Muslims elected to the state legislature, quite possibly, but we'll see soon enough, inshallah.
Yeah, there are 3 running in state of Illinois as well. What is happening to Muslims who are already there? Ilhan Omar in primary was facing major challenges, barely won. How is she doing? How is Rashida Tlaib is doing? Keith Ellison was struggling as an attorney general in Minnesota. Do we have any of the projections or any news about these candidates?
I'm going to check on that and let our guests kind of chime in on what their thoughts, what races they're looking at in particular tonight, what they're really curious about. I will say that the polls indicated that Keith Ellison might actually lose that race for Minnesota Attorney General reelection because of concerns about crime and his support for a ballot initiative that would have essentially replaced the Minneapolis Police Department. And then Ilhan Omar almost lost her Democratic primary quite unexpectedly. She won it just barely, but she's expected to win her seat because it's still a heavily Democratic seat. And same for Rashida Tlaib. It's expected she will win easily. But I'm curious to see, Imam, again, there were a lot of Muslims in Dearborn, Michigan who said, we're not going to vote for her because she did not side with them on the issue of the sexually explicit books in schools. And so there are a lot of people who said, we're not going to vote for her. That's probably not enough to cause her to lose, but I'm curious to see what the margin is if she does win in her seat. But maybe we can get Amina to maybe chime in on what she thinks about this issue we were discussing earlier, dichotomy of Muslims and the struggle of voting for Democrats, Republicans, and the concern about social issues. And then we're also bringing back in Hina Zuberi, our co-host, as well, to join us. Hina's back here, but I'm going to go ahead and take it away, and then we'll move around, inshallah. And make sure to unmute yourself, please.
I think we need to have some conversations, and I've listened to lots of the debates. When I lived in Chicago, I would go to some of the let's invite the person that's running for this office or the other. And what I heard was Muslims didn't control the conversation. It wasn't a conversation about what do you think about this? You know, we have a stance. I hear the two gentlemen here, and I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Um, the political scientist says, well, if you um, let's rethink thinking about the impulse to teach our children about homosexuality because you don't want to wind up being the next victim of attacks. On the other side, we kind of have the position that, well, wait a minute, we can't give up everything hoping that we are not the next victim. Uh, and I think that is an issue. I mean, Black folk have not always, but in recent decades, I'll put it like that, voted Democratic. The Democratic Party has not done them huge favors. It's rolled out a gazillion programs, mostly which make others rich and the poor are left poor. And we haven't challenged on those issues. We also have not challenged people on what they think about Islamophobia, what they think about Muslims as other immigrants coming to this country. Because if I came from New Zealand, you know, when nobody would ask me what my religion was, it was please, please hurry up. Let me help you pack your bags. And I think that there is reading care reports as I do, every day, sometimes twice a day. I mean, the Islamophobia is off the charts. It's from masajid to individuals. I mean, it's all kinds of stuff.
Doctor, may I respond? Dr. Amina, I really respect very much everything you say, as always. But the reason I've said that is because many of those controversies are fabricated for the purposes of elections. And the Republican Party often focuses on culture war issues.
Yeah.
And so one day is a Muslim threat. One day it's the immigrants at the border, southern border threat. One day it's LGBTQ books. And much of those are not real controversies. They're fabricated, they're exaggerated to create wedge issues so the Republicans can have a better chance to win. And for us to really believe them and actually treat them as legitimate political issues, but they're in fact fabricated wedge issues, we're falling into the trap. And that's precisely how they succeed, by breaking up this coalition.
Well, can't you just say it's a wedge issue and then go on and say whatever it is you got to say? I mean, you can't.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Because they're banned. It's not, and you're right. It's not only the alphabet crowd. It's not only their books. It's books about critical race theory. It's books about this, that, and the other. And you're right. They're on a banning mission to preserve what they think is true. On the other hand, I think it's dangerous to permit everything.
Well, let me bring you up to date. What are the current situation in the senatorial control? In Georgia, for a while now, Mr. Walker is leading with 1% of the vote, and 65% votes have been counted. And in Ohio, Vance is leading with 52.8% vote and 55%. So in critical races, these two are now Republicans leading for last 15 minutes, but 65% vote and 55% vote in Ohio are counted. Still in Pennsylvania, Fetterman is leading with 53% of the vote, 30% are counted. In Wisconsin, Barnes Democrat is leading with 51%, while 32% have been counted. So this seems to be a continuously challenging night for all sides. People will be just waiting and discussing who is going to win and what's going to happen. Any thoughts about how the governance are going to be for President Biden for the next 2 years if he loses Senate as well as the House?
I think Brother Rafi had a thought before we shared some results. If he wants to do that, but I would just note that if Republicans take the House and the Senate, President Biden's going to be very tempted. So he's going to have to decide: do I just want to fight with the Republicans for the next 2 years, or do I want to try to compromise and get something done? Because nothing, cabinet positions, nominations, nothing much is getting done unless they agree to it. On the flip side, if they control the House but not the Senate, and he still has a Democratic Senate, he still will have quite a lot of freedom to do the things that he needs to do, like appoint people to positions, to have a big say in the budget and things of that nature. So that's why the Senate is so critical. It's a radically different scenario for him, depending on whether or not the Republicans take the House and the Senate, or just the House. But Brother Rafi, I think you had your hand raised. I thought you wanted to share.
Yes. Actually, I want to go back to the subject that we were discussing earlier. I think when we talk about a Muslim candidate or Muslim elected official, I think the first word Muslim has to mean something. And that depends on how much are we willing to compromise to fit into a certain party. I'll give you an example. We were talking about the rainbow movement. One state official, state delegate in the county in Virginia, wanted to introduce a bill in upcoming General Assembly session, stating if a child comes to the first of all, if a child goes and tells a counselor or a teacher that he or she has inclination of that they belong to a different gender, right? And if the parents cannot interfere in that process. And this elected official wants to introduce a bill saying that if the parents do interfere in the process, they could be prosecuted. Okay. So the thing is that, when we're debating on this issue, how much are we trying to compromise to fit into a certain party? I think our Muslim values come first, whether if you're a Republican, whether if you are a Democrat. If our values are being compromised, then we're really not serving the community, Muslim American community, or we're not serving our religion. So when I said earlier, all politics are local, I think we need to be really careful here and really pay attention. It's very sensational to talk about, national politics, right? But the most of the issues that affect our daily life as Muslim Americans are local politics. And sometimes we don't pay enough attention to that. When there's local elections going on, our community is not so pumped up about going and voting as it is during presidential election or congressional or Senate elections. And I think we are really, losing the battle. And I think we need to have more candidates running for local and state level elections. I'm not saying that the national elections are not important. They are very important. But the things that affect our daily lives, okay, in the towns, in the cities, in the states that we live in, okay, those are local elections. But again, I want to emphasize, yes, we should belong in parties, both the Democrat and Republicans. We cannot put all of our eggs in one basket. But when we start compromising our basic tenets of Islam, okay, then we're really not serving the community. We're serving a party.
I'd like to say something to that, what Brother Rafi just said. I'm just observing local elections here and the response of the Muslim community, just taking school board elections. One of the things that I noticed in the rhetoric going back and forth in our local WhatsApp groups and email threads was that people are stepping away from the Democratic Party. They're ready to vote in Trump supporters, ready to vote in people who stood by the Muslim ban, and let go of even Eid holidays because of the LGBTQ issue and parental rights. So we are seeing this shift in voters. I'm seeing it here locally, where people are like, okay, if we can give away, the Muslim ban isn't happening right now. Trump, these are local elections. We don't care. We care about our children. We care about school policies. So we're going to vote for people who stand for parental rights. The other thing that I have been noticing, and I think I wanted to ask people who are here, is a lot of Muslims going into voting. There isn't enough prep. So we've seen a lot of the national organizations, including CARE and Empower, getting people out to vote. Like, that's the big push. But where is the push to actually educate people on what these folks stand for? So there was a lot of angst about who are we voting for? What's the sample ballot like? Who are you voting for? Coming into community leaders and asking them who they're voting for, because people haven't been able to do that, be educated on those topics. So that's, I think, for the Muslim community to step it up a notch, is to go beyond getting out the vote and actually rating these politicians on their issues, where they stand. So I'd like to get
Brenda, if you don't mind, I can address that. I think the faith-based institutions have to play a big role because being Muslims, we congregate in our masajid during Fridays and our Eid. That's where the mass gatherings take place. We at our masjid, I can talk about, is that we held a debate between our congressional candidates in our masjid. We bring candidates to the Jummah prayers and let them address our community. And at that same time, our community members have an opportunity to engage with these candidates and pick their brain. And then they can make a decision exactly whom they want to support. And I think we need to utilize our institution first to show these candidates what our numbers are. Okay, if they see a lot of Muslims, then when our leadership goes and speak to them after they get elected, they know how many people we're representing. So I think we need to do a better job in our masajid, bringing in candidates and elected officials, and let them communicate with our community. I think that is the answer.
Well, folks, it's coming close to ending of our transmission for elections coverage, except that election results are still not very clear. But thank you so much for your time. At this moment, Senate race is still not clear. 67% votes counted in Virginia. With 1% margin, Mr. Walker is leading. And there, if nobody gets more than 50%, since there is a third candidate, it will go to re-elections. In Ohio, with 6% margin, Republican Vance is leading, and 61% of the votes have been counted. In Pennsylvania, 35% vote have been counted, and Fetterman is leading with 51%. It's a rather wide margin. In Wisconsin, 41% votes have been counted, and Bernice is leading by 50.8%. And of course, in Arizona and Nevada, we haven't started receiving any reports yet. Elections are just closed there, and in an hour, probably reports will be coming in. Well, thank you so much from my side for all of your contributions and comments. And the amount of time the social issues took in the last 30 minutes of this conversation, considering the background of this community, conservative Orthodox community by and large, and considering just 20 years they went for Republicans in a big way, if a behaved Republican comes in who is respectful of the Muslim community, I see 20-30% of Muslims turning towards Republicans. But I don't think Republicans will ever wake up to smell these votes. So thank you so much from my side. Good night.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.